Speaking of tough spots that they put themselves in, Will, what about the Dallas Cowboys? I mean, the beef going on with the Dallas Cowboys. Speaking of teams that overpay their stars, that put themselves into corners,
that wait too long to sign those stars as well,
that have issues, that have drama. The Dallas Cowboys, like, I turn on Twitter for, I take a couple hours off, and I'm like, what is going on? And Micah Parsons, I love that Micah Parsons was called out by a now former teammate, paraphrasing here, but basically, well, you know what, bud? If you spent less time tweeting, maybe you would win more. I was just like, hot bleepity bleep. That is a brilliant, brilliant statement, because I've been thinking the same thing for the last 2 years of Micah Parsons.
If people haven't seen the full interaction that Micah Parsons and now former teammate DeMarcus Lawrence, who's gone to the Seattle Seahawks, who, by the way, still can't figure out what on earth they're doing with their offseason, but DeMarcus Lawrence did an interview and said, Dallas is my home, but I know for sure I'm not going to win a Super Bowl there. To which Parsons responded saying, this is what rejection and envy looks like. And then posted
rejection and envy.
Yeah, amazing.
Like, wow, that's actually like a pretty profoundly bold line. Rejection and envy.
And said this is some clown stuff. To which DeMarcus Lawrence responded, calling me a clown won't change the fact I told the truth. And as just said by Brian, if you spent less time tweeting and more time winning, I wouldn't have left. And DeMarcus Lawrence is already one of those interesting players in the NFL that, like, he can definitely contribute to a defense, right?
Yeah.
And he's got some juice on the outside. He has some health issues, and
he's apparently got some pin-up anger too. Like, he's got something to play for this year.
He is a guy who that has been the case for some time, right? I think there's the two angles to this. There's a footballing side which we can get to, but when you look at the fact that Jerry Jones didn't speak at the Combine this year, that he has continually just rejected even having conversations about what's going to happen with Micah Parsons' future, when you look at the fact that for a replacement for DeMarcus Lawrence, they brought in Dante Fowler, who had his best year in some time last year, but can't play on running down, so is just potentially useless to you outside of being a situational pass rusher. Like, that and Solomon Thomas is not going to fix your pass rush. There's just nothing about the way that this team operates, considering that, not unlike the Bengals, huge amount invested in their top tier guys, huge amount invested in Dak Prescott,
very top heavy,
huge amount invested in CeeDee Lamb. But realistically, like, what's their big deal been this offseason?
They
re-signing
Devontae the Eagles
Turpin
next year. I mean, they're not. Look, I mean, that's the thing.
Getting worse at running back. Javonte Williams, brilliant, great.
I definitely do not agree with everything that Mike Florio says at all. And often I find myself thinking the exact opposite. But I love how Florio has often pointed out in his the PFT recent stories about the Cowboys, and especially for this, and, in general, and I'm paraphrasing, but has pointed out that this team very well could not be any better next year. Like, they are appearing to go backwards. Their window very well might have closed. They never even got close to the window. I mean, the window's barely even been open the last few years. There's nothing to say that the Dallas Cowboys will be any better next year. They will get Dak Prescott back, new head coach, a lot of changes, but they're not significant changes that are going to make the football team on the field that much better. And for me, it was fascinating to see, obviously, Will, this tension between two of your star defenders. One leaves, gives an interview to a Seattle reporter, it looked like it was on the field, and basically says, like, this was what started it all, that Lawrence comes out and says, well, I knew I had to leave the Cowboys because I was never going to win a Super Bowl there. But also said, I love Dallas. This is my home. My family's not going anywhere. I will always be somebody who's tied to Dallas. But he had to get the hell out of Jerry world because he knew that for the remainder of his career, he was not going to win. His words. He knows it better than we do. He was not going to win a Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys. To get called out like that tells you what their locker room must be like, the frustration that some players have to have at Micah Parsons. I don't know how the Dallas Cowboys are going to do what they're supposed to do when Micah Parsons is on podcast all the time and responding to everything and getting in the middle of everything. I just don't. You'd have to be the best player in the NFL to make that work, and it's clear that the Cowboys don't believe that he can do that.
What kind of astonishes me about the Cowboys, and this is where it comes down to the similarity with what we're saying about the Bengals, the top-heavy nature, but also like they're in that group of people. You mentioned San Francisco earlier, like who have painted themselves into a corner at this point where they have to nail the draft, right? The Bengals haven't drafted brilliantly, particularly on the offensive line, a pace of particular issue for them. The 49ers haven't drafted well at the top of the draft, very well in the middle rounds. They find contributors, but they've not hit the stars since really Bosa. Like that's probably the last first-round pick they really nailed, right? The Cowboys draft really well. Like it's
even in the middle rounds. Like they actually draft well in the middle rounds.
As much as we laugh at Jerry Jones on the regular, they are a really good drafting team. And like the guys who they're relying on coming back this year to make impacts on their defense. I mean, you hope DeMarcus Lawrence off that horrible injury comes back and is a contributor. But, you're talking about a third-round pick. Trayvon Digg leads the lead in interceptions out of the second round. Like the guys they've drafted in the last 5 years who are regular contritibutors are good players.
Dak Prescott was not the number 1 overall pick of the draft.
No, not here, not even by a long shot. But they do this great business in the last weekend of April, and then at no other point in the other 362 days of the year, it feels. They just can't get it right. It used to be a tendency to overpay their own guys. Like that was the kind of knock on them. Now it feels like it's a kind of combination of doing that, but doing it just too late. And same as the Bengals, that just hits your cap, hits your bottom line, hits your cash flow eventually. And it leaves them in a position where they can't then add through free agency or keep the fringe players who really make up a team.
I thought it was fascinating because I felt like you were getting a peel back behind the curtains of what is really going on within the Cowboys and their culture and what their players think, where you've had, Mike McCarthy and all of those issues, Jerry Jones, the contract, Dak. There is clearly a lack of belief that team is doing it the right way to have one of your star players call out a former star player on Twitter. They're going back at each other. That's probably what it's like with a lot of teams. I mean, it's pro sports, it's egos, it's millionaires, it's a lot of talent. You're some of the most talented people in the world. You have to have incredible self-confidence. You're questioning everything all the time because you want to get better. None of those have to be bad things. But for Lawrence to call out Micah Parsons that much when so many of us have all been thinking the same thing, like, how can this continue? How can you have one of your best players, one of the best defenders in the NFL when he's healthy, when he's playing at his peak level, just constantly opening his veins about everything on social media? Even in 2025, I don't think that really works. The only person who I can think is a comparable would be Draymond Green from the Golden State Warriors, and Draymond's not Draymond anymore on a basketball court, but Draymond Green has a few NBA championships.
Yeah, exactly.
Love him or hate him, and it's definitely love or hate. There's no between Draymond Green, but Draymond Green proved at one point that he was one of the best in the world. He was on the best team in the world. He has the ability to have that talk. Micah Parsons, on a couple Pro Bowls, that's fine. He hasn't done anything to prove that he can be the loudest talker in the NFL, and he often just comes across really whiny, really overly emoting all the time. He's almost like an emo kid. He's like emo Micah Parsons, and I love that the bigger kid called him out. Was like, hey, dude, shut up, like enough with the tweeting. Shut up and go back. And then, maybe get in the playoffs and you can talk a little more.
Micah Parsons, where are you? That's what we're saying. And just to close that loop, because I think you're right. I don't hate the era we're in where, guys do go and do podcasts and do their own things, because there's some very good ones out there.
There's some great stuff on that,
And I think you take the example of CJ Stroud, right? After year one, a sensational rookie season, one of the best we've seen in the last decade. He then did a bunch of appearances and showed just how intelligent he was, and showed how, and he spoke very openly, and he clearly watches the rest of the league, and he's clearly a student of football and all that stuff. And then after this year, where despite going and winning a playoff game, it was clearly a tougher year for them. No, CJ Stroud has been a lot quieter, has been working a lot harder, has been in the facility. We hear all these things.
But what's Micah Parsons doing? Micah Parsons lives on this thing, and I'm like, just... Again, he focuses on his craft. He's incredibly talented. He's very good. But if you're going to tweet about everything and complain about everything and react to everything, you need the foundation there.